Welcome to Ken's Corner. Guess what? I'm gonna throw in another how-to video. Okay, what this how-to video is going to be about is what they call fly cutting a piston or piston notching or any of that stuff. And there's reasons why you want to notch your pistons and all that good stuff. There's good reasons. The biggest reason would be if you need more clearance. So when we did the piston to valve clearance video, and if you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and click up here, and it'll show you how we tested the piston valve clearance on this motor. And we would like to have a little bit more clearance than what we would have, especially down the road if we're going to add a different cam or something like that, where we possibly would need that clearance. It's best to go ahead and do it now while I get everything tore apart. Okay, what is fly cutting your pistons, or piston notching for other terms? Okay, what does that actually mean? Well, that means that what you're going to do is make a kind of a valve relief for the valve. So when the valve comes down and gets close to the piston, sometimes it might come really close to the pistons. You don't have enough clearance. Well, there's a couple of options you can do. You can go out and get a different piston that actually has a notch in it for your valves. The other way, change your cam, get something a little bit smaller so you don't get as close. You can make a thicker head gasket, and that could solve all those issues. The other alternative, what you could do, is what we call fly cutting a piston. That's basically taking and putting notches in your stock pistons to get that space that you need. So there's only a few options that you can actually, that you could use. So the option that I'm going to go ahead and choose to do is I'm going to go ahead and fly cut these, okay? I had a really great friend over at 918 Motorsports, Jeff Moore. He was kind enough to loan me his fly cutting tools. These are actually Lindy tools. So I have one for the intake and I have one for the exhaust. So basically what happens, we got a dummy head here, or it's a used head. We're going to actually put in here. We're going to install these cutters into it, set the depth, and we're going to take a drill to attach it into this and kind of drill down into it. So what this video is going to cover is how to set all this stuff up, how much depth you need to go into each of the pistons or each of the intakes or the exhaust. And so this video is going to cover you how to set all this stuff up and to see if it's something that maybe you can do yourself. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, to get started, first you have to know how much clearance you have now. It's very important to know that how much clearance you currently have with the current cam that you have in and all that. Now I do have a video that lets you how to check your piston valve clearance, and if you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and click up here on that video again. So once you know what your clearance is and how much you want to gain, how much you want to gain on the clearance, then you just kind of subtract one to the other, then you set the depth of the tool, and that should get you pretty close. Okay, I know on this setup my intake is 90 thousandths, 91 thousandths, and the exhaust is 101. Okay, so those are my numbers, right? So what I'm going to choose to do, I'm going to go ahead and probably add another 30 to 35 thousandths out of the head, or not out of the head, but out of the piston to give me a little bit more clearance on the intake and exhaust. And hopefully down the road that should be enough clearance that if I decide to put a different cam in here, something a little bit more even aggressive than what's in here, then it really should give me enough clearance. Just kind of give a reference, what I have in here right now is a Brian Tooley Stage 5 cam. It ran with my stock heads, 243 heads, no problems, no issues there. But the reason why I'm changing it out is because I went to a PRC head from Texas Speed, and I had the head shaved down 20 thousandths, and it was a lot bigger valve. So what that did, it brought my clearances really tight where it's at. Like I said, it would run it just fine where it's at, but I'm kind of thinking down the road that, hey, if I'm going to get even more aggressive cam that's in there, even though Brian Tooley is a great cam and stuff, that I might try a different cam that might be different, aggressive level, that I'm going to make sure I have enough clearance. And being the winter time that it is, I have time to do it. I'm going to go ahead and try this out. So anyway, with that, let's go ahead and get started, get this stuff set up, and let's go. Okay, to get started, make sure, recommended is put blue painter's tape, and you can use whatever tape you want, but I went ahead and put blue painter tape over everything so I don't get any metal shavings whatsoever down in the block. That's one thing I do not want to happen. Okay, so after you get the blue tape on, what we're going to do is set a head up here. It's a dummy head that we have to use. Do not use your brand new head to do this project. Please don't do it. I know there's people that said you can do it, but man, I just hate to see people get metal shavings and it mess up inside the cylinder and stuff. So not the cylinder, but inside the chambers and stuff, or in your valves, or in the sleeves, or any of that stuff. But anyway, I mean, worst come to worst, if you have to, maybe, but man, just make sure you get everything cleaned good on it. So with that, what we're going to do, I'm going to go out and get the head, put it up here, and we'll get the tools put in, get those shafts good and lubed up. We'll start to set the depth, and we'll start cutting a hole in this. Not a hole, but a notch in it. Don't want any holes. You can tell this head's been used a lot to do a lot of fly cutting on it. Just an old, not too sure what head this is, but it's an old LS head. But more importantly, we got the cutters in here. Okay, what you want to do when you slide them in there, to make sure you lube the valves on it, or the stems on it with some lubricating oil, and should be ready to go. So all we have to do now is put the head up here on the block. Okay, like that. Okay. Now we're going to bolt it down to keep it from moving around. I think you just need a few bolts. You're not going to put a lot of pressure on this to drive it, to move it. You just want some bolts just to kind of hold it in place. So got a few bolts over here. We'll zip down. So it's secured down. The next thing what you want to do is take these slip collars. Go ahead and put that on. Okay. Okay, what you want to do next is to set the depth of your collars. What you want to do is get your tool, the cutter, actually resting up against the piston itself, so you kind of just feel it. Once it feel like it's hitting on the piston, then that's where it needs to go. Okay, and being this is a dish piston, that cutter is going to find the lowest point or the highest point on it. So with me, I have to feel it and see where that cutter is, make sure it's cutting on the top of that that dish part, on the high part. If it's cutting the low part and I set it, then when it goes to cut, it's going to cut even more. So anyway, just have to be careful on setting these up. So anyway, so let's go ahead and set up the exhaust. Okay. Yeah, you want to make sure you get enough pressure on these collars to make sure that as you're cutting, that you have when you push the drill on it, you want to make sure these collars don't move, because if they move as you're drilling, that collar could slip. You can go even further down, further in the piston you want to. So when we get the drill set up here, we're going to watch it very closely, make sure as I'm putting a little bit of pressure on it that I'm not pushing against this collar too much. So anyway, let's get started getting the drill set up next. Okay, the moment of truth. I got my drill on it. I got electric drill on it. I guess I could have used my battery one, but I wanted to make sure I had enough oomph here to really turn it and control it fairly good. So I don't know if it's a good decision or not, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Basically, what I want to do is kind of, pull up so it's not hitting the piston, and start the drill up and watch it start cutting. Then I'm going to see the top of the collar hopefully come in contact where it's not, once the collar gets in contact with the top of the valve guide, the sound should go away. So it just basically goes really quiet. Then you know the cutter did its job and we don't have to cut it anymore. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the intake, see what happens. Okay, try again. Pull up. Yep. Yeah, it was done. So that's a good sign. Okay. So we get the drill off here. Then next I'll go ahead and pull the head on up. Okay, another thing you want to do before we pull the head off, go ahead and take a shop vac or something and try to suck as much shavings you can out of the head while it's still in that cavity, so you can get some of the metal shavings already out of there. So when you pull it off, the things just don't go everywhere. So let's go ahead and you can go through the spark plug hole, through exhaust, or something like that, I guess. Okay, I already got the bolts loosened, so let's go ahead and pull this and see what it looks like. Okay, I don't know if you can see that or not, but you can definitely see where it cut it at. Okay, it's got a little notch here. You can see the exhaust has a little notch here as well. So I think that was a success that we got a little notch in there. And what we're going to do next, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to actually check the piston valve clearance again. I just want to see, as I make these changes, how much it affects it. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but I want to be safe. Then I know exactly how much piston valve clearance I have on this. The other important thing is make sure the piston is always up on the top of the cylinder. Okay, that's, you know, close to the deck where it should be. So anyway, so I know when I go to my next ones, once I set those numbers up, it should be pretty close across all of them. So I'm going to use this one as kind of my guinea pig. I'm going to make small cuts and get it where exactly I want it and go from there. The other thing I'm going to check is the radius on it. So I'm going to put some blue Prussian blue, whatever is that blue dye stuff. Puts on the valve. I want to see where the valve actually hits on here. So let me get the tape ripped up. That's all cleaned up. Get ready to put the other head on and see how much clearance we have. So let me go with that. Okay, the next check we want to do is to check to see how, the radius cut. In other words, how big is that cut out from the radius of the valve. Okay, what I did, put some blue marking dye on it, and all I'm going to do is put the head on, then take the valve, touch it, and kind of twist around and see where it leaves the blue mark at in my cutouts. So just give me assurance that how much clearance I have between the edge of the valve to the cutout. So make sure it's ample clearance. So let's go ahead and throw the head on here real quick. Okay. Socket down just same way when I cut it. Put some pressure on it at least. Plus it keeps the head from trying to fall off. Okay. Now these have the checker springs on it, so they can be a little bit more difficult to turn, but I'm going to try to do best I can. Okay. Just taking that valve and hit up against that cutout. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing on my exhaust. I got it good and turned in there. Got a keeper, almost came out. Same with my exhaust. Okay, there we go. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and take the head back off. I think once we do this once and we assure that the cutout looks really good, I mean we don't have to do this to every cylinder. So we just want to do this one to assure ourselves that we did cut it properly, we got the right depth and all that stuff. So it's a lot of setup stuff here at the beginning, but once you got it set up right, then it should come pretty easy. So let's go ahead and take the head off. Okay. Then you can see where it's actually in contact with the head, or with the piston. So let me see if I can show you a little bit closer here. Let me get the head to sit down. by the marking compound, we can see where the exhaust is being hit at. Wherever it's blue is where the face of the valve is hitting. So over here, you can definitely see this is blue here. You don't really see too much blue in here, or you got barely blue in here. So the majority of the valve where it's hitting on the intake is right in here. So as the valve comes up around, it doesn't come in contact with this. So this is probably the lowest point that's in the valve. So pretty good information. I think the radius, or how much we have the cut on the back of it, looks plenty. So as far as I can tell, it looks good. So the next thing I'm going to do is check the piston valve clearance and see where it's actually sitting at. So let's go on with that. The next thing I did, I went ahead and checked piston valve clearance on the intake and exhaust. So since I made a 30 thousandths cut on both the intake and exhaust, I wanted to check to see what the clearance would be after that cut I did. Just to say, hey, if I cut 30 off, did I gain 30 or not? And what it came out to be was the numbers for the exhaust was 153, and for the intake was 135. So just kind of recap what the numbers were at the beginning. At the beginning, the intake was sitting at 91, and I went to 135. So I gained 45 thousandths clearance on a 30 cut. On the exhaust, it's sitting at about 101, and I went to 150, or 101, 102, and it went to 153 thousandths. So I gained almost 51 thousandths on a 30 thousandths cut. Now there are reasons why I think it gained so much, and what I'm going to show you for these style pistons, why I think I gained so much. I don't think it was because I measured incorrectly of how much the cut was or any of that stuff. I think it's because it's a dish style piston, and once I pull the head off, I'll show you exactly why I think we gained so much. So anyway, let me get this head pulled off, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, hopefully you can see what I'm getting ready kind of demonstrate here. I have an intake and exhaust valve off of another head, okay? So the reason why I think it gained so much, I don't know if you can tell, but this is a dish piston. So it actually goes down a little bit. So what I'm thinking is how we gain so much is when I cut it, okay, when it was cut, or when I was measuring the piston valve clearance, the piston was actually hitting, or not the piston, but the valve was actually hitting top of this raised portion of the piston, okay? So when it got cut, it cut down, and I'm thinking what happened, it got measured down to the dish part of it, okay? Not on top of the raised part, down the dish part. So it actually cut down 30 down into here. So by cutting 30, we kind of cut further down into the piston and did away with this. So this is, they say this is 40 thousandths, whatever that stuff, and that's maybe 30. Give you 70. It's not a true relationship number, but I'm thinking maybe the cut and how it was representing and stuff, it just, it just cut a little bit differently. It made it a little bit deeper than I wanted. Hopefully that's the case. That's why I did cut it really only 30 thousandths, because it affected it kind of in a big way. Okay, I did manage to get the other side done. So I had, and what I've been doing as I cut them, I would go and measure each one and see how deep it is. So I know how deep I need to be when I use my piston valve clearance check on number one. I measured all those, how deep these are. Then as I was cutting them, I was measuring just to make sure I got down at least that far. Most of them are pretty close. This one I went deep at a 52. Now I did make one mistake on the other side. On the exhaust, it's like at 79. And that scenario I was talking about earlier in my video, I talked about that collar. If that collar slips, you go deeper. Well, that's what happened over there, and it went deeper than I wanted to. I mean, it's still 79 deep. It's not that bad of a deal. It just got a lot of relief on it. So, but other than that, most everything else are within the same number, a few thousandths here and there. Not too worried about it. But so I mean, you just have to be patient with this. I spent 4 or 5 hours working on this. on and off the head, making small adjustments, and if it wasn't deep enough, just barely go in there, set it to, really small 10,000ths gauging or whatever you need to get down to your numbers, and just take your time. So that's the key to this. You just have to take your time and just don't go in there to whoomp whoomp and be done with it. I got all the eyebrows cleaned up. I did not use my Dremel. I actually just did it by hand. So you can see that I took all the sharp edges off of it, so now there's nothing sharp here. I started off with a very coarse grit, like 240 or 120, I can't remember, but it's pretty coarse. Then I went back, after I got that, then I just shot it back with like an 800, 1200, 1500 grit, whatever, and just kind of smoothed everything out. So you just want to take the edges off. You don't want nothing sharp on it and stuff. So if you feel like you got all your sharp edges, kind of laid over, you're good. So the cutter did lift a little bit of chatter, I guess, are better terms for it. And the chatter I'm talking about, if it bounces up and down a little bit, or just kind of there, and it kind of marks it differently. So taking the sandpaper kind of smooths those back out, makes it a lot better looking and appealing. So so you're just trying to get all, at best you can, get it all smooth and back laying flat again. Like what I said at the beginning of this video, is kind of a how-to video. I have never done this before. I'm not an expert or claim to be an expert. I'm just kind of showing you the experience I went through to do this process. It is a very challenging process, but with a little bit of patience and not being in a hurry, you can get pretty good results with this process. In the past, I used to buy pistons that's already have notch. I think a bunch of us been down that road before. But if you want to try to notch it yourself, hey, they do make a tool for something like this. But like I said, I am very pleased with the results. This is going to help me down the road when we go to a different cam with this. Now I have more adequate clearance. Even in the future, if we decide to swap out the pistons, get rid of these dish and go to more of a flat top, I'll go back and fly cut those flat tops. So I have no issues about doing that. But I do want to reach out and say a really big thank you for over at 918 Motorsports. If you have any of your needs for LS parts or any stuff like that, get in contact with them. They are a great bunch of people to help you out with, especially Jeff Moore. He actually the one that loaned me the tools to do this process. I'm fortunate enough, he's local here with me. He's a really good friend of mine. So he did help me out with the tools and the heads and all that stuff. He has, I can't say anything more about him. So anyway, if you do need anything for LS parts wise, please contact 918 Motorsports. So I'll leave a link down in my description for his site and stuff. So anyway, with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. But if you do like what you see, go ahead and hit that like button and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.